Thanks. There we go. Thank you. So just by way of introductory comment, I guess the intention with the investment strategy specific to Cromwell is to bridge the gap between the master plan and all that good work that's been done over the course of the last few years, and the opportunity associated with the endowment land holdings. So what I propose to do is just talk you through why have an investment strategy, what's the rationale behind it, why you should be thinking in a strategic way, what it might look like with specific reference to Cromwell and your role and function as a community board, the various steps that I would suggest that you should be thinking about taking to pull this thing together, identifying and evaluating the endowment land assets, developing a series or a set of investment principles, some operating criteria, and identifying what the outcomes are that you want to achieve and embarking on this exercise, recommendations and decisions. And then finally, I was just going to touch on the Bannockburn Road industrial development, which is a real live case study, if you like, that Brad and I are involved with Garrett and the team, and I can give you a bit of an update as to where we sit on that and why that probably provides quite a useful template on a site-specific basis for applying the, what we're doing down there to various other land assets in the portfolio. Slide, please. So the first thing at a fairly basic level, why have an investment strategy? What is the point of putting together something along these lines? And I guess in bold type at the top, it's about making strategic decisions based on evidence, real live quantitative data, and in accordance with a set of agreed principles. And the intention is to develop a framework which provides guidance, a set of rules, a set of operating criteria, so that you can make decisions based on that are consistent and have some discipline associated with them. So I think those various points there, an investment strategy will, and I'm talking in a generic sense here, acknowledge the need to proceed strategically, which feels kind of the point that you might be at about now. Recognise the scale of the opportunity in a property portfolio, and I'm going to mention that word a few times, portfolio, because I think when you are looking at a collection of assets, all of the decisions you make about any one or multiples of those assets need to be made in the context of the wider portfolio. There's not a conflict, potentially, with everything that you do and every decision that you make. One of the first steps, which I'll get into, is recording the investment principles. What are the things that drive this? What are the important things for you as a community board? What are the outcomes that you want to see? And then every decision, every action from that point gets traced back to those founding principles. And inherently, you're developing a set of operating criteria and a consistent way of operating if you do it in that order. Providing an integrated strategic approach for identifying and evaluating land assets, develop and maintaining an understanding of growth projections and market conditions. And I think that's really important, and that comes back to making decisions based on real market data, quantitative information, things that you can, things that you know, not things that you believe or things you might have heard or anecdote or whatever else might be floating around out there, but real tangible data points that inform your decision and assist you in making the right decisions. And I guess formulating a framework for investment decisions that is scalable, that can be scaled up or down, that can be applied to multiple assets, that can be applied to a single asset, that can be picked up and transferred to other parts of the district potentially, in all sorts of scenarios. That's another benefit of coming up with a strategy that's recorded, written down, and provides you a set of operating principles. In relation to Cromwell specifically, my take is that the first step is to develop a view of what the endowment land portfolio looks like, what it contains. And again, as I said earlier, view it as a portfolio. All of these decisions, any decision that you make is interconnected, and there is a potential knock-on effect or implications of whatever decision you make. From there, I think once you've understood the shape of the portfolio, what you're dealing with, you can drill down a bit further into identifying and evaluating, understanding the characteristics of particular land assets. Be very clear what you're dealing with. What do these assets look like? What are their characteristics? Again, using actual data and tangible quantitative information, market data that's out there. And in relation to Cromwell, and critical for you as a community board, and I think as a local authority, enables you to make those decisions which are strategic, consistent across time and across people, and they're principled and they're outcome driven, and most importantly, or very importantly, I imagine, in this world, can withstand scrutiny and are defensible. I think one of the first steps that you possibly need to grapple with, and it may be a big question, is to understand the original premise of the endowment land, where it came from, the purpose of the endowment, what the governing or fundamental obligations might be. I understand some work has, maybe a fair bit of work has occurred in that space already, but I think that's really important as a first step. And then I think perhaps building on, or reflecting upon, and understanding and articulating what the core principles of the community board are as well. There'll be legal parameters, community purposes, what is the reason for the existence of the community board, and what are the aspects or the characteristics or the outcomes that you would want to see integrated into an investment strategy to drive the outcomes that you're looking to achieve. What are your underlying principles? What are your strategic drivers? Are they financial? Is it about debt? Is it about community use? There's multiple. There's many different strategic drivers that you might arrive at once you examine, where you're coming from, what your core principles are. Time horizons, short, medium, long term. Again, that's something I'll keep coming back to. We've got the constraints, geographical constraints, future use requirements, legislative constraints, all of that sort of thing. Questions around timing and future land use requirements as well. What the growth projections look like. Where are the pressure points? What land might be required for future community use, infrastructure use, all of those sorts of things. And are there any non-negotiables, anything that's completely off limits, anything that's just sacrosanct that you're not prepared to think about or touch? If it's any of those kind of don't go there areas that emerge in your discussions, and when you reflect on this, they probably need to be tabled as well, and then tested quite extensively as well, I would suggest. And I suppose in developing that set of investment principles, what that moves you toward is arriving at and articulating the particular outcomes that you want to see in looking at the endowment land assets, the portfolio. What do you want to achieve? What do you want to do? And what are the underlying things that you want to achieve for the community as a community board? So what are the outcomes sought? And I've just broken it down there, I suppose, into three categories, and these certainly aren't exclusive by any stretch. These are ideas, I suppose, more to get you thinking along these lines, and there will be other things that I'm sure I haven't thought of. But I guess at a high level, what you're looking to understand, what are the fundamental or the base outcomes that you want to see? And you can rank them in this order. So, what are the fundamentals? What are the essentials? What's desirable? What can be achieved if possible? And then what is definitely off the table or you don't want to see as an outcome. So thinking about those various points out there, financial outcomes, there might be drivers around debt, investment returns, certain revenue streams that need to be created or maintained, when and how much, what you might be thinking about in terms of retaining or investing, short-term, long-term, what are your time horizons? Is this a 5-year, 10-year view that you're taking? Is it an intergenerational view? There's quite a few considerations there. Social outcomes, community aspirations around, for example, housing open spaces, current and future community infrastructure requirements, facilitating private sector investment, that might be high on your agenda, looking for opportunities for job growth, diversity, resilience in the local economy, and environmental outcomes. As I've listed there, could be around provisioning for future water infrastructure, connections, opportunities around, looking at your carbon footprint, offsetting credits, all of that sort of thing too. So again, working through those principles, what you want to achieve, and defining the outcomes that you'd like to achieve. That's that next step there. Before you even get into looking at the individual assets within the portfolio. So once you do get to that point, again, what I'm suggesting is that wider asset base and understanding the portfolio and the shape of it and where it's come from, and what the parameters. To categorise and group them. There's a few different categories that I've listed there. The status of the land, freehold, leasehold, etc. What the current land use is, who's using it, are they as a council use, is it community use, a third party, is there a commercial aspect to it, what its future might look like, given its location, its proximity to existing zoned land, for example, or future or current or future transportation links getting there and away, reserve land. Breaking it down into a number of categories, I think, is useful, sorting and grouping and ranking. And then once you've been through that exercise, I think there's the opportunity to prioritise a smaller number of individual assets and really think about looking at them, doing a deep dive and thinking about possibilities on an individual or maybe a handful of assets and spending your time and effort on those few.
Can I just jump in this one, Mark?
Yeah.
So this course started with the endowment bank, that when I was talking to Mark and Brad, I think that it's very value forward. Obviously, that will be our focus. Obviously, the road is where this is the emphasis here. But also, as we think about the principles of investment, as we've got listed up there, is to be thinking about, well, for this other land, are the principles that we're applying to the backbone land, do they apply to these other pieces of land? So you've actually got a land strategy that we can propose up to council, and for, this is what's important to the Cromwell community. This is what we believe is the best investment for this land, for the betterment of Cromwell and for the whole district, for the stuff that isn't endowment. So I think there's a bit of an opportunity to, while using the endowment land, which is the stuff that's really tagged, there's also an opportunity for this board to be advocating up to council for the other land in your district as to what the principles of investment should, what you'd like to see there, so that when council sitting around the table, they know, they've heard from the Cromwell Community Board around the strategic assets sitting within your area, what this board think is best for the community. So hence why you might be looking at that list going, hold on, wasn't this just about endowment land? So I just wanted to clarify why that's, we'll make that link in there.
Yeah, and I think coming back to the scalability of it as well, and the being able to take a framework that you develop that is being developed with quite a Cromwell specific community board lens. Once that framework is there, the inputs can be manipulated. It can be taken to say different parts of the district. You know, that this might be applied elsewhere in the district at a kind of portfolio wide level, or you know, drilling down further into single assets, or you know, maybe a handful of 1 or 2 or 3 or more individual assets as well. I suppose once you've worked through the principles and arrive at the outcomes that an investment strategy needs to include, what are the things that you want to see, and then evaluated, ranked, categorised, prioritised, and thought about doing a deep dive into maybe 1 or 2 or more. Recommendations that flow out of that are essentially binary. What do you want to do with a particular land asset? You can really only either do 2 things. You can put onto it, or you can divest it in some shape or form. So it's quite binary, that first decision. But I think there are a multitude of variations and many different ways to jump and different possibilities from that point. And I say it again, you know, any single land asset, you know, needs to be thinking about, you know, where it sits within the portfolio, what the implications might be for the balance of the portfolio. And the final point there again, you know, just bringing back any decision to the original investment principles that have been developed and articulated, included in the strategy, and the outcomes. That provides you with your framework, the consistency, and I suppose the defensibility of any decision that you might make. I say decisions should reflect the investment principles, but I think they actually must. If you're going to have integrity in your strategy, any decision needs to be able to be taken back and into the outcomes that identified right at the outset. I'll run through these. These are kind of the 3 options, and again, multiple possibilities within each. But just to give you some ideas, hold or develop or sell a particular land asset. Holding is the easiest thing to do. That's the status quo. Nothing changes really. You're hanging on to it. The easiest decision that you'll make. But what I would suggest is that you really need to arrive at and articulate the reasons why you're holding on to a particular land asset, you know, for whatever use, and understand that there will be costs associated with holding an asset. There's operational costs, depending on what it is, operational costs, holding costs, and of course opportunity costs of staying with it. I think it's important to think about any investment required, again coming back to costs, and that asset to maintain it or improve it for whatever use it has, and be thinking about the time horizons as well. What time horizon you're working to, and when you might decide to come back and revisit that decision. Is that a 1-year thing, a 5-year thing, a 10-year thing? But I think it's always useful to articulate that at the outset. Develop, and so many different directions you can go with this one. It's possibly, I'd suggest, the most complex of the three options. Any development involves investment. Every development involves risk. Really important that those two things are understood and quantified and accepted at the outset. And then what do you do with it? Develop and sell, develop and hang on to it, retain it and lease, or develop and retain and use as a community asset. There's so many different possibilities here that I won't run through in detail, but I guess the points out to the side. What I would suggest is that, you know, if the community board, if the council was embarking on a development project, that whilst I'm very cognizant of and respectful of the parameters that local government operates within, a development proposition needs to be viewed through a very commercial lens. My mantra, I've been doing this for a few years, is you have to be first, you have to be fast, and you have to be the best. There's probably, I would suggest, a few more hoops to jump through in a governance sense and an operational sense with local government. That is the nature of your business. But these are the things that need to be understood at the outset. Understanding the risks is really important. Consideration of structure in terms of people, in terms of resources, in terms of operational requirements and the governance structure. They're all things to work through. And thinking about the optics as well. And I say this cautiously, but as a local government organisation, you know, taking on risk is subject to scrutiny. Competition with the private sector is always floated out there as a reason that local government might not want to get involved in development projects, and be thinking about where it sits within the core business of what the LGA sets out as well. And then selling. And I wasn't going to include that you can only sell it once out to the right here, because you know that. And I didn't want to kind of be glib or offhand around that, but that is the reality. You need to know that, you know, seller regret or remorse is a real thing. And it's an opportunity gone once the asset has been sold. I think as an organisation, you need to be really clear on the purpose of the sale. It's not necessarily the whole asset. Subdivision is a straightforward process. You know, it might be part of the asset. You know, there's lots of different ways of looking at it. And articulating and understanding, being comfortable with the purpose of the sale. You know, that it is a strategic decision. It's not short-term thinking. It's a long-term strategic decision that's the right decision at a particular point in time for a specific purpose, going back to the original principles and the outcomes that you've established at the outset of the process. I think timing is really important in terms of sale, competition, supply, demand in the market, and achieving maximum value. And I think too, I might be a bit cheeky saying this, but there are some competitive advantage that the council does have that others don't. And I'm thinking about incentives, rate relief, and deferral of development contributions and that sort of thing. So, you know, there's a few different levers that you might be able to pull to give yourselves a competitive advantage in that commercial world. So I suppose just to wrap up, I was going to give you, and you may know most of this from your previous meeting, but just a quick summary on where we sit on the Bannockburn Road industrial land project. So Brad and I have been involved the last couple of months alongside surveyors and engineers Elliot Sinclair. Where we have got to, we presented a paper to Gareth and the team a month or so back just recording what we understood to be the client drivers and project expectations for that particular development, and there they are there to become self-funding as early as possible, and we think we can see a way to achieve that. Limited, but perhaps some ability to fund debt fund the initial investment required. And then the big one was to achieve 25 million in net revenues by 2029. I understand that's for the purposes of paying down other debt. So those are the three things, I suppose, that are foremost in our minds as we put together the development strategy there. That paper also kind of broke down and explained the development project, how we would approach the development process with a true greenfield site, blank canvas. Our initial thoughts, there was a high-level master plan that we presented as part of it, but that is a work in progress. And we also built a financial model which showed, in theory, I suppose, how we can achieve those three objectives, and how we can get, in our view, this project up and running quite quickly with fairly minimal client and council CCB investment to get it up and running and self-supporting and self-generating of costs of revenues reasonably quickly. What we're going to do next, in process, we have a land supply and demand exercise underway. We've got Collier's Research helping us out with that. That's giving us a really good understanding, looking back with the last couple of decades as to the demographics and the growth trajectory, and establishing demand and looking into the future and what demand might look like into the future. That's almost done. There'll be a draft available within the next few days, in fact, on that. And what that's going to enable us to do is to really fine-tune our development strategy, get that back to the council for comment and for approval. There's a detailed market revenue and development cost exercise on the back of that, alongside a master plan, probably, well, highly likely to be a staged master plan. And then we'll assist Gareth and the team put together a business case for the LTP on the back of that. Following that exercise, we'll be straight into subdivision scheme plan, planning strategy and consent applications, all going well, subject to the appropriate decisions within council, I suppose. And what's going to fall out of that, I suppose, is definitive project program and staging. When we start, when we get underway, what our marketing strategy looks like, what the product type looks like, what are we producing in terms of section sizes and accessibility and all of that sort of thing. When should we be advising to engage with the market, to start marketing, to start pre-selling, which is all about de-risking. Costs and budgets, including that upfront investment and any debt requirements. And the important bit, when revenues, when pre-tax profits can be anticipated as well. So that's what the next 2 or 3 months looks like in terms of the Fannycombe Road project. And that was me, really.
So very aware that we've just thrown a whole lot of information at this.
Yes.
Late in the day. So really what we wanted to outline today is sort of the approach to this work. And apologies, we've been going flat stick and we didn't get this presentation. It would have been obviously with the helpful business members and it had a look over it. So I guess what we want to feedback today is the comfort in this approach that we can go forward and build into our agenda, having a conversation with you guys around the principles of investment, what we want your outcomes to be for the community. Does this approach feel right for this board? I guess the real steer that we need for the property group
There's a lot
today.
of fun there.
Yeah.
We can get this anyway. But it was an overview to put all that info in there so we could percolate a little bit.
Yeah. We're not going to fire into workshops today, principles of investment, and the outcomes you want, that would be a bit roll. But is this the approach to this work? is this at this initial stage meeting the expectations of board members as to sort of high level what you're wanting to achieve? I know it's really more meat and bones, but it's just a good start.
This is really good, but can you help me out here? Is today with these guys, is it with Mark and Brad? Is this the start of a land strategy workshop? Like is this, or is it talking about the scope of works that you've been engaged to do a couple of months ago?
No, so this is about beginning the land strategy workshop. What Mark put at the end there was tying it into how this is going to run alongside the current Bannockburns subdivision work that's happening.
Yeah.
So this work is about really defining that land development strategy and how it's all going to come together. Yeah. So that scope has already been well, Gareth can talk more to that than I can around that Bannockburns subdivision.
I'm not sure the board is privy to the scope of works that's happening at the moment on that piece of land.
But the Bannockburn,
Yeah.
there was the paper which we brought to you beforehand. That's what we've got. So we've got an initial scheme plan, which is marked scheme plan that we're going to be using.
No,
Which is an indicative starting
so
point.
that's the master. This
Yeah,
master
yeah.
plan, right?
Yeah, well, that's the reason we didn't want to share that is we didn't want people to say this is the plan we're adopting. We haven't landed on that yet, right? So initially, all we want to do now is we want to do this 2-lot subdivision, what that looks like, and then that gives us enough money to start this whole process. And while we're doing that, we'll be investigating what that master plan actually is going to look like, because there's a couple of officials. So we've got, as part of our district plan, we've got the initial conversations with Doc at the road running down the boundary of the Shaky Beetle Reserve.
Yeah.
We are busy scrutinising that and challenging that. So is that going to be sufficient enough to get a desired outcome, or do we actually need to challenge that? So that's the stuff that we're busy working on at the moment. Yeah. So nothing's been formed in stone. Once we get that information, that's when we come back to the board. So this is where we've got to. What do you guys think?
Yeah.
At this point, Gareth has just got a holding figure in the LTP that has just been a bit of a guesstimate, hasn't it, Gareth? As probably Greg and the other consultants haven't exactly developed that up to bring it back to the board. So we kind of we are running against LTP timeframes on this one.
It's probably why it's pushing today.
Yeah.
Right. Let's. I mean, I'm comfortable with that. It's just when we come back with the scheme plan, what that subdivision looks like, it will be literally on the cusp of we have to make a decision. So it's kind of going to feel like we're putting you guys under pressure, but we're not.
Yeah.
To get this funding in to the LTP, otherwise we can't
We
monitor.
do have an LTP workshop next week, so if there was further information.
So the negotiations can't stop.
No, I know, but I'm
Can't
just
stop.
saying that,
Yeah.
but we will have had time to digest some of what
Yeah.
you've given to us today. So in terms of us going back to what you've requested from us today, that you've got partially across the line and not quite fully,
Yeah.
you know,
So I just want to go back to Mark's point about moving fast. You know, with sure footings, that's the game we're in. And I know sometimes it feels like we're rushing, but we're actually not. We scrutinise this really a lot to try and get the best outcome. And whether it's unfortunate or not, it's the fact that we are governed by governance. And we've got a 6-week cycle of the board, 4-week cycle of the council. It's just trying to match that up to get the best outcome.
I've got some initial thoughts.
right, go.
Yes.
Is that what this is? It's two-way for some initial thoughts from the board. In terms of
100%. If you've got the energy, go for it.
Yeah. Right, cool. I mean, I agree with basically everything you put up there, right? But I've got some of my own thoughts as well. The relationship between that Bannockburn land and the town centre is absolutely part and parcel, because the crude way of my explanation is you make money from Bannockburn, you spend it from the town centre. And free water is another factor that we need, right? But that relationship between Bannockburn Road and the town centre can't be understated, but it's also, while the board has the rights to the funds, I suppose, from the endowment land, it's very much a council matter in the town centre. So we need to work towards some sort of MOU, like here's your plot of land, you can do development within that, you could ring fence it, for example. And whether that goes right round the bow tie or whether it just goes to that rail line road into Isle Street, that sort of thing. If we could get some aligned with sand about what we're dealing with there would be good.
And ultimately, this, once we've developed up this strategy, it does need council approval because of course only council can sell by land, etc.
Yeah.
So while the endowment land is tagged, ultimately it's not really the board's money, it's still the council's money. But I think that the board here has quite a role in saying, hey, we believe this is what's best for the use of the money because it's our town. This is where we think the best future investment is. So ultimately, as we go,
that 25 million that you're looking at within that 5 years is potentially, that's your short term, but potentially we've got additional funds if you're going to look at the other infrastructure needs in Cromwell, which will include some water infrastructure and Cromwell contributing to that, or the Cromwell endowment land proceeds, but the town centre does become the big albatross that sits around our necks. I mean, you're sitting in it currently and it's, and that becomes part of what Cromwell would probably seek to want to be included in the considerations about spending of that money. So in terms of a strategy for how funds are used or why we want to move it at whatever pace, being able to say, here's funding that the district can use to advance this project for Cromwell that's come from Cromwell endowment land. So it fits all the criteria of endowment land, but it still fits some of that need from the council saying, this is still district money, this is still belongs to the district. So the same with water infrastructure stuff. So yeah, I mean, there's lots to think about there, but
heaps to think about. There's nothing precluding this board saying to council that we think the best use of proceeds is to advance the town centre project as it works through within the 2027 LTP as we get some more beat on the mindset. Yeah, so there's nothing under on my reading, and we can definitely, as we work through this, further advice if required for in-house legal now, which is quite handy. There's nothing on my reading of it that would include the board saying to council, one of the big fish off the rank we believe is Cromwell Town Centre, and we'd like to see the endowment land money proceeds used for this.
But it's not a whole discussion. I mean, it's not even huge for it's enabling works for the town centre, which we could then decide to sell a block to a developer to build a 3-storey showcase.
So then that whole notion that we might, once we've looked at this from the Bannockburn Road perspective, that we start looking at other parcels of land within the Cromwell ward and thinking about how they might be managed. Yeah.
So important.
But then you look think about the northwest precinct and how that might see fund some of the other work in the town centre. That's those things will become.
So it's important that area needs all of our involvements.
Do you think there'll be the ability, and perhaps Gareth, to take that, I guess, a step back from we'd like to, realign the street or develop that portion to those, like was discussed, those kind of community outcomes, and take a much longer view of what the purpose of that.
I think
and when he's talking about the principles as opposed to individual projects that Cromwell Town, what are we wanting to achieve for the people of Cromwell? Are really, thriving town centre or whatever it be, as opposed to.
We've already done a master plan that identified a lot of those things, so we can tap back into what the principles and things were there and check that they're still aligned to what we think our community is looking at the moment. But I do think when we're looking at that short term, mid term, long term, that we know some things that are short and medium that could be included, but we also want to look long term, because what we're hopeful of is that this strategy means that the proceeds of this land, once it's sold and that one and only time we can sell it, isn't just all snapped up immediately, but that there's, you know, because the endowment says for the betterment of borough funds. So if there is some funds that can grow to be used to scope other things that are best for our future generations. Yeah. So yes, I absolutely agree with knowing what those principles are, what we want in terms of as a community. Knowing that some of what's going to come back at us is, we know there's the debt funding that we have to get across the line. But then our community will tell us that a thriving town centre, and they'll tell us this is the wrong place and that we should bowl the whole thing, but we don't want to spend this money on buying all the buildings in this town centre just to bowl them do. Is that?
They'd also like a hydro slide, but not a race rise, please.
Yeah.
And new rubbish bins.
And rubbish. But Sarah's already collecting it. If you all went out and got $4 for every child you know, we have bins at Jolly's tomorrow. And
Sorry, you missed the context of that part of the conversation.
we can have a new more with all our kids.
So yeah, I totally agree that us thinking about what those principles and what those vision and values are, that's going to take us in that strategic direction. We need time to really consider what that looks like. Yeah,
I think a big benefit of having this strategy in place is that it can sustain changing boards as well. Like, there's no guarantee you're going to talk to us next year.
It's consistency over
Yeah.
time. I think it's for the framework will do that. Yeah.
Yeah, like every board will add its own flavour. Like, you know, in the past we've had a board that voted to retain this building that was going to get rolled down. It's not a showstopper for doing the town centre perhaps, but you know, each board's going to have its own flavour.
well, each board is going to have its own flavour, and the community is going to come back and say that plan that you put in place then, is it still valid while we're still talking about it? And so we still have to be able to go, the decisions that we make are based around what our community told us that they wanted, principles of those things. So, you know, having that lens to work through is certainly a useful lens to be able to make those decisions.
Yeah. When it comes to developing master plans, big difference with working in local government is that you can have your master plan, but when it comes to developing it, it kind of has to be in bite-sized portions, each training, each long-term plan, because as we've seen, you can set aside $70 million for a hall and a mall, but then it just goes south after you blow out the first part of it, right? So it's good to have a master plan in place, but just don't get too far ahead, I think, especially in local government. It's going to be good to have a predictable timing of income over, say, 20 years. Like, you know, 25 million in 5 years is one thing. Is it going to be 50 million in 10 years? And then we can work out our spending patterns based on some sort of realistic income pattern. It would also be predictable for the market. You know, if you've got logistics companies wanting to move to town, it's like, well, not next year, but there might be some sort of certainty. 3 years is good. You know, some people just need to know that. Again, with the Memorial Hall scenario, buying and selling in the same market is important. So if we sold half of Bannockburn Road tomorrow and spent it in 10 years, that money's not worth as much, right? So when I'm talking about spending, selling out there, spending in the mall, we need those two plans to be rolling in unison, or whether it's Three Waters, we need to be spending that money as it becomes.
So that already starts speaking to a bit of a timeline there, because if we're looking at more development stuff being talked about again for 27 long-term plan, that's when you want to have this strategy in place to know what might be coming online at that point, so that you can start working toward that.
I think, broadly speaking, the end goal should be to build the investment. So you can't say we have $300 million. Let's say let's get 600 million and have it accumulating, right? So that's what we should be working for, rather than just think and live, right? And we'd need some advice on whether we sell a quarter of it and lease the middle half of it, and whether that lease income can fund debt for other things. You know, what's the balance there? Be good to get to the bottom of that.
They are some of the aspects that like people are building into, you know, a financial model and making some recommendations in that regard. Because it does come back to time horizons. It comes back to what your short-term financial drivers are, but also, you know, back to your purpose and outcomes and that kind of intergenerational recurring revenue. I think that's the real opportunity, you know, and amongst the Bannockburn proposal.
We're going to have debt knocking on our door, whether we like it or not, every 2 or 3 years. Like, you know, need to pay off this 5 million, that 10 million. But broadly speaking, it'd be good to, that lease model, I think, is pretty good in my mind. That needs to be investigated, because then it's like you said, you know, you haven't sold it, could be turned into something completely different in 50 years' time.
Yeah, it's the long game. I mean,
Yeah.
Yeah, so the comment, there's more to life than selling land.
Okay.
And yeah, I said before as well, we need a master plan, but not too much detail. You can say big box here and small box there, but we don't need to design the street. Right. Just need to say what areas are going where, so there's some sort of predictability there. And the other one, you know, people mention, Jerry Beercroft mentions putting residential in there, for example. Just determine whether that's happening or not. Probably not. But just be clear about that, right? Because that's, you know, you've got heavy industrial, you've got light industrial. Residential doesn't fit in there, let's just be honest about that. Yeah.
Yeah. We just look childcare. It's just childcare.
Liabilities with the policies, carbon credits, they've been.
Oh, we obviously don't have credits down.
It's 90 hectares and it is ward based, and I have been looking throughout the district for what we deem as dead land, so it's stuff that we're just getting nothing out of. I think I might have told probably about 23 hectares that we could probably utilise. It's just about minimum lot sizes for the forestry block that you can actually list the trees. And if that is the case, we're going to lose nothing. The carbon credits will go up and come back the same. And we're going to, when these guys have modelled the stuff, we haven't really catered for the amount of income that we're going to get over the 19 hectares. But potentially there could be a saving. Lot prices are crap, right? So I'm just going to say that out there. But what it might be is logging down, and then whatever money you get out of the log prices should only de-stump the land, which would give quite a you know, substantial spend in that respect.
Yeah.
So absolutely, we're looking at that, and I have been exploring the fact that do I knock them down in one go, and then I'm going to be dealing with a bit of dust mitigation before I can grass out, you know, after I de-stump, and what that equation is going to look like, or do I knock it down in sections?
And of course, we looked at that when Gary was press, that same conversation was had. Do you do that in sections? And then the financial reality of that was it was much more expedient to do it all at once.
100%.
And so that may be what you come up with.
Well, usually logging company, you know, say, look, we'll knock it all down for nothing, so we won't be putting any money into this, and we'll give you a guaranteed sum of this and that, right? And no risk, absolutely no risk in that respect. And so I'll bring that to the board and say, this is what the equations look like. Do you want to go ahead with that?
One last comment. You mentioned it's easy to sell land, which it is. It's more complex to develop it, which it is. I'm not intimidated by that, but this development strategy could be the way of giving people a bit of a hope. We don't know who's going to be on the board next, but you know, there's some people who are just shooting hope and want to sell it. Then they can go and tell their mates that they made 10 mil for community, despite it was half the land or something. You know, like if we have this strategy in place, that can be the stepping stone for people that don't know what they're on about with land development.
And then that's where we go back to what Tamer was saying, that that's vision and strategy for what you want to achieve with this for the future has to be really clear. Because knocking off the whole lot and cut price because it's a quick gain is not going to do that for us.
No.
Right. Anyone else got stuff and things that they wish to add?
Neil? Yeah, I mean, it was two wishes and he's not able to hear all of it.
Okay.
Do we record this?
And there aren't any decisions being made on this. The slideshow has been sent around and circulated. We know this is something we're circling back to once we've digested this to start the next piece of work. So
Yeah, we should ask for some direction and are we on the right track? So I think this is going to be a really good product moving forward. And like Rock alluded to, you might be able to pick this model up and put it around the district in other areas as well. So I think it would be a really good investment.
I've been really feeling comfortable, talk to Brad and Mark about when we can come back and have, probably not at 4 o'clock in the afternoon if we can avoid it, but have a conversation, to the actual starting to build that strategy.
yeah,
And start thinking about what outcomes you want for the community, what is the vision of this board, all that for now, for the future. Which will be a bit of a thinking workshop. We'll definitely, prompt you along there.
Yeah.
But I'll just see, the validity of some of these tweets to how they can.
Okay. Yes. It will be great if we can start having those conversations pre-Christmas, obviously.
Be really good at the next few board meetings. Of December, but anyway, catch up.
What was the date? Do you reckon?
Was it 9th of December?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm sure that'd be fine.
I'm sure we can, yeah.
Well, we'll confirm that because it would be good to start developing.
And it may be that we look at putting, like we've done today with having that initial workshop pre-meeting so that everybody's actually got fresh brains to help to bring to the meeting for you.
But it will be something.
Yeah.
Sounds good.
Right. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Matt.
Yes.